Welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. I'm getting a bunch of questions on my sweater video from yesterday about why the pieces don't unravel while you hook them. I think this is a great question, and I think it's great working on rug hooked pieces with sweaters, right? Because we're getting into winter. So it's the smart time to talk about it and think about it. Let's look at why and how they don't unravel. So if you remember this piece I'm working on, it's called Sweater Weather, with the witch wearing her sweater and walking through this forest of sweater trees. I had a different color in here last night. It was this color. And it was this striped sweater, right, that I just bought yesterday at Savers. It was $4.49. It's a Pendleton wool sweater. You can see I cut the sleeve off, and I was using the blue part. And I had all of this hooked into the trunk last night while I was watching Murder, She Wrote. But it just wasn't right. It was too bright for this composition. So I pulled it all out. And you can see, even having pulled it out, it's not fraying, right? I'm going to easily be able to hook these pieces back. So I've got these into a Ziploc, and I'm going to hook those probably in a different part or in a different piece. Now, the reason that sweaters don't unravel is because, well, when we unravel something on purpose, it's typically you grab something at the bottom and you find the string, right, the end of the string that the knitting machine has ended on, and you pull and it unravels like zzz. Now, something like this, every sweater is knitted differently, right? These are all machine knitted sweaters, right? These are commercially made sweaters. They're all machine knitted. This is like a Fair Isle type of sweater, and it has a lot of threads in the back. And you see how the threads connect horizontally, right? That's the way that it's knitted. Now, you would think that this would fall apart if I cut it. It actually doesn't, and I'm going to show you that it doesn't because I've already started hooking with it. I'm replacing this tree with this sweater. So I started hooking a few loops as a test, and it doesn't unravel. And we're going to hook that together in just a second. Now I've also got, for example, I started this tree up here, and this is a thick felted sweater. So this is a sweater that I've already put through the washing machine on warm or hot, right? And then I take it out typically before I dry it, and I see what it looks like. If it's a little more full, being fulled is different than being felted, because if it's felted, it's so thick that I can't use it at all. I can't hook with it at all. This is what I would call fulled. It's kind of connected. You can see it shrunk a little bit, right? It looks like it shrunk a little bit. It has a good texture. It's hooking well. It's thick, right? It's quite thick pieces. These work great. With this sweater, I'm at my mom's house visiting. I didn't wash it. I just started cutting it and hooking with it. It also works great. If it started falling apart, my next move would be to wash it in the washing machine on medium hot or hot. Take it out, see if it's full enough. If not, I might put it on into the dryer, or I might wash it again to get it to hook better. But right now, it's hooking great. So I'm probably not going to bother. So you can see a sweater that's very, very thick that's already been fulled. Hooks great, right? This is the tree I started a few minutes ago. And then we've got sweaters like this one I showed you yesterday. It's very, very thin. This is a Talbot's cardigan, super thin, right? It's merino, angora. It's a blend of natural fibers, but it's like a summer weight, fall weight sweater. Very, very, very thin. I don't think I've washed this at all, and it makes very thin pieces, right? And these hook great too, because this is my whole background material. So the thin pieces, let's show hooking with all the different types of pieces. Let's start with the super thin. And this one is like, how can that hook? It's so thin, right? It's so limp and such a wimpy looking fiber. Well, it hooks great. And I usually keep the tails down with hooking sweaters. I'm hooking it to burlap because sometimes if you keep the ends up, it can look ratty, particularly if it's a thinner sweater like this one. So you can see, yes, it's a sweater, and no, it's not going to unravel, right? I've cut it along the grain. So you can see it's slightly ribbed in the way that it's knit. It's ribbed this way, and I cut it this way. And for that reason, it's got good stretch this way. What would happen if I cut it this way? Well, it could stretch out more easily, but it's still going to work. I'll show you in just a second. So I'm going to show you hooking it this way, which is still going to work. But because this isn't the way that the thing is knit, you can see I have lots and lots and lots of edges. Because it's knit this way, it's better if I cut it this way because now I've got lots of edges. Do you see what I mean? When I cut it here, I have 2 edges because the ribbing is holding it together. When I cut it here, it's going to stretch more, and every single end is an end, right? Every single edge, there's like 100 right here on each side. So let's see, it should still hook, but I prefer, I'm going to start down here because that tail is still active. I prefer to hook with it according to the way that it's knit, because you can see how when you do it against the knit, it comes up a little more. I don't know if you can tell. I can tell the edges are a little rougher. They're more curly. They're more flyaway. They're not. It's not going to unravel, right? It's not going to fall apart or atomize in my hands, but it doesn't perform as well because of the edges. Do you see how that looks a bit messier than, for example, that? And I cut this one with the grain, I cut this one against, right? So with and against. I try to stay with, because if I do against, I end up doing a lot of this, right? The loop is safe, but the ends look messy, so I end up trimming the loops a lot like this. I'm going to do it off camera when I have better scissors. But this is just a neater looking surface. And if your piece is washed, it's going to matter less. If it's a little bit felted, it's going to matter less. So for example, this is the really thick piece that I was hooking with. This is a little bit harder on your hands when you're hooking with a piece that is this thick. But since I'm hooking into burlap and it's going on the wall, I'm not overly worried about it. If I was going to hook this, huge, I'd be very worried about my hands hurting after a while. Maybe not yours, but mine would, because it is thicker. It is still very, very, very nice to work with. When it's a little bit fold like this, it doesn't want to fall apart at all. It's just a little bit thicker and harder to pull through. And see, I can pull the loops back, change my mind, change the direction. It all works really well. With these thicker ones, I do leave the tails up because they're so thick that once I cut them, see like the cross section of a tree, right? It's not gonna look ratty when it's all in with the rest of them. Something thin like this does look ratty. So I have different techniques for different kinds of wool, and until it's in my hand, I can't really say, and I don't really know how it's going to perform. So for example, let's hook more of this one. Now remember, this is the trickiest kind of sweater because it has all of this thread connecting it, right? And much of it is on the surface, right? It's woven into the surface by a machine. So with this one, I am going to want to actually hook it this way, not this way. So if I hook it this way, and let's do both, I'm not going to have a very interesting series of loops. Let's first look at it like this, right? This goes against the idea that I was saying, that you don't want to have all of these ends, but with this one, you either do want all of these ends or it's not going to be very interesting. Let me show you what I'm going to do. Because you can see these look quite neat, right? This is a thicker material than this one, right? So different rules, different thicknesses. I can see here that the cuff is held down by one little stitch or 2 little stitches. So I cut that open because I want to use as much as possible. And I cut it right to where the ribbing of the cuff started. Now I've got this piece and I do not want to stretch it and fool with it too much because these are all active edges that I've now cut. Every single one of those little strands has the possibility of playing me at this point. So it will unravel if I fool around with it a lot. And I don't want to because I want to use the entire sweater. You never know when you're going to run out, right? So I'm going to hook it in right away. And I'm going to keep the loop down on this one. Comes from experience. Well, I by accident pulled it up. Now I've kind of activated those loops, right? And they're going to be more frayed the more times I do that. So let me pinch it underneath really tight. There we go. And keep that down. I want to keep all the sort of raw edges, if you're a sewer, away from what I'm doing. And I'm deciding as I go how I want it to turn. This is directional hooking that my hand is doing underneath. I'm holding it in a certain way so that it turns with the branch. And I'm also pulling it to slightly different heights. I want it over a hair. Pull it to slightly different heights, see, because I did that twice, it did that little bit, right? the whole piece is not going to unravel. That's just going to be on the surface. So I'll trim that later. I want to make as few loops as possible with these more difficult sweater materials, right? Because look at how beautifully it hooks. If you just hook it in there and leave it, that one didn't come up in the right place. So, and see a little bit of an edge there, right? Little bit, right? This is not a game changer. It does not mean that your piece is going to unravel. These loops are locked in there so tightly into this backing, they are never going to unravel. If it was 1860, I'd put it down on the floor and walk on it until, you know, it was completely threadbare, and it would go the distance. I'm going to pull the tail up and see what it looks like. Yeah, the tail's not too bad. For the moment, I'll leave that. If it looks awful, I pull it under. If it doesn't look awful, I leave it. So you can see there is a big difference between that weight and, for example, this weight that's right next to it. So I make sure, coming up against it, that I'm hooking. These pieces could also be wider, right? But I'm also thinking about how much sweater I have and how much background I have. So I'm cutting them a little bit thinner, and see how they're meeting up here with the ones that were cut the other way, and these just don't look as good. They look like they've been through a crimper. You know those machines, the old-time crimpers? So I'm going to pull this up here and end this one, and I'm going to pull back this one. I don't want to do too much of it in the way that I don't like, because like I say, I've only got so much sweater, and I don't want to waste it. Now, the reason I like to cut it this way, even though it's a bit trickier, right, because it's against, you can see how it changes color constantly, right? And if I cut it this way, that's not going to happen. So let's do just a little bit. I'll cut a little bit here. And I'm going to get like an all gray piece, right? And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what I want. But the prestige for me is in the fact that it changes color. Me pull up a little bit here. It's going to be fine because it's kind of tucked into the side, but see that piece, the edge is giving me a little trouble, so I just tuck it under and pulling up loops that are just a little bit more boring. And in this case, can you see with a close-up how it's not hooking very well this way? Right? For whatever reason, cutting it this way, going across, going against the fiber and cutting it with all the different colors is hooking more neatly than that. Now I'm going to leave that because it's in, but you can see there is definitely a difference, right? These are really not as pretty as these. So, oops, Murder, She Wrote just went back on. Sorry about that. Machine just maxed out the pause time. So you can see, for whatever reason, and because there are millions of different knits that machines can do through the years, different ones are more popular, but for whatever reason, as I sample hooked these, going this way on my material works better and looks nicer than going horizontally across, right? And I have to honor that because the sweater is responding the way it's responding. I can't override it, and I don't want to work against the nature of this knit because I'm not going to win. So in this case, it goes great hitting all the colors, and that's how I'm going to do it. For every sweater that I'm using, there are different properties. It's knit differently. They perform differently. So at the end of the day, you really have to sample as you hook and figure out what looks the nicest. But none of this is going to fall apart. This is like tough as nails now. I mean, anybody could walk over this with any shoes, all of it, and none of it is going to fall out. It is all in there. This is like a tapestry that is now completely secure. It's just a question of, with the different weights, with the different types of sweaters, with the different knits, how do you sample them? Well, you do have to sample them. How do they look once you have sampled a few loops? Just pay attention to how tidy it looks, how neat it looks, and make good decisions, because when it hooks better, right, and there's less ends playing up, it is sturdier. It's definitely sturdier, and that doesn't even look that good. So I'll probably pull that piece out. So you figure it out as you go. That is the synopsis. And we are going to end this video with Jocelyn showing you, come on over, Red Rover, her latest creation.
Ah, I just dropped it on the floor.
And what is this, Joss? Something seasonal for us. Ghost in the Trees. What is this one called?
Green ghost.
Green ghost. I'm going to call him Chartreuse ghost.
There's a heart on his back.
Oh, there's a heart on his back. Well, a heart to you all. Happy long weekend, everybody. Happy holiday weekend. And we will see you soon at Ribbon Candy Hooking.